Hey everybody, here we go with the patch 13.24 preview, part 1 and 2, both of them combined. We're going to go through both tweets and all balance changes. We're going to do all of that in this video. As always, this video will be pretty long because I'm going to take my time and go through all the different changes on my own time. So make sure to make sure to watch this video. You can use me as a podcast, watch your phone, do whatever. It doesn't matter. Just listen along or watch along. It doesn't really change much. And we'll go through this entire video. Before I go through here, I know inevitably people are going to ask, why have I not been streaming League as much? Why have I not been playing League as much? With the big item update coming out in just like 3 weeks from now, I figured I'd take some time to actually play some other games. And in addition to that, I just find this current meta quite frustrating right now because it feels more so than ever before in the past. Riot is just basically forcing their favorite champions to dominate and be the biggest picks and blah, 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 blah. We can see this pretty hard. If you look at Masters Plus right now, we can see, if I can just show this right here, you can literally see in real time that like Riot's favorite picks get to dominate the meta and be the best champions, which I'm not saying is giving me like a crisis of faith in the company, but it's just like, wow, so if you play Jax, you'll just do amazing because Jax just scales very well and does way too much damage. Wow, now Riven gets to join the Giga Broken Club. Wow, Fiora has never been nerfed. Cool. Oh, we buffed Camille when she was already really good. Blah, 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 right? And it's very frustrating to me, especially with like big changes coming out in 3 weeks that might at the very least be different and exciting. It's frustrating to me right now that the current meta it's not shaped like organically. I guess I'll probably do a video on this in the future because for now this is a patch note video, so I don't want to spend too much time on this, right? But it feels like in the past, that Riot would accidentally make some champions broken or overbuff them or, just do something like an accident, and then they would just sort of let it go and just sort of let the meta be the meta, right? But nowadays it just feels like they just pick and choose, right? And they pick and choose and they go, Riven, you get to join the Giga Broken Club. All Riven mains free challenger, right? And oh, cool, awesome, interesting, right? As a person who looks at these patch notes a lot and looks at the reasoning a lot, I definitely feel that there's a disconnect between the Riot developers and like the game that's being played. In other words, basically there's a game that's being played, the game that I play, and then there's like this fictional game that Riot balances for. It's like they balance for pro play without actually balancing for pro play. They say they balance for pro play, but then we see, oh wow, another Worlds where Azir and Syndra and Orianna are pick ban. Orianna spent like 2 or 3 Worlds out and then went back to being pick ban again. Like, how many Worlds has it been now? Like, over the course of League history, how many times have we had Azir, Syndra, Orianna? How much? Like, it's 2 out of 3 of those in every Worlds are pick ban. It used to be Rise, but then they finally got fed up with Rise, and now they just sort of leave Rise gone. And through looking, again, just through reading these patch notes, and spending, because I spend a lot of time reading patch notes, right? I spend a lot of time reading this stuff, and to me it's just frustrating watching them constantly like not really admit that the game they think they're balancing for doesn't really it doesn't really exist. And then with things like Jax, they just giga buff Jax into the grand line, right? Like this champion, they reworked him and he became the most broken thing ever. And then rather than ever address it, they just go, oops. Look at Yone, same thing. Yone was one of the most powerful champions in the game. Then he got buffed, and now his ban rate, his pick rate is skyrocketing. Before you say, well, his pick rate isn't that big. Actually, it is, because his pick rate, when you look at his pick rate between mid lane and top lane, his pick rate is over 20% now. He is now the 3rd most picked champion in the game. He's picked only less than 80 carries, and because 80 carries have the highest pick rates in the game, because there's just simply less of them, this now means that yes, Yone is, after 80 carries, the most powerful and the most picked champion in the game. Riot as a company doesn't seem to realize that some champions like Yone will just have lower win rates. Their win rates will just be lower because people that play the champions just are dumb. I don't know a better way to put it. They're just dumb, right? Like, we've known this for a long time. Jace never gets nerfed. It's just, I'm not going to go into it more than this. I've already spent like 4 minutes on it. Basically, it's frustrating to me that, like, more so than any other time in League of Legends history, the last couple of years that I've been doing these patch notes, it's like it's giving me a clear view as to what's happening. And what's happening is basically that the League developers as a whole, I'm not saying every one of them, but when you summarize every League developer, when you take the summation of all League developers and you average them out, on average, they do not seem to understand the game of League of Legends. Anyway, outside of that little rant, now let's start talking about this. This is Frogson, who seems to be one of the developers who actually seems to know what he's talking about most of the time, not all the time. So let's look at his first tweet. Okay. With the game changing pretty significantly next patch, we're looking to make improvements to champions that will persist through the item changes. These include things like fixing champion roles, skews, quality of life improvements, reshaping of power budgets, and field improvements. Now, to be clear, to be blunt, what he's saying is that considering 2 weeks after this patch, they're just going to update every item, that rebalancing every champion for the current items is probably a waste of time. And while I do agree with that sentiment, and I do think it's a fair thing to say, I can't help but feel that, you know, let's go back. I'm going to go back 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to go back 4 patches ago. We can still see Jax dominating the game. If we go back 2 patches ago, we can see him dominating the game. If we go to this patch, he's dominating it even further. As broken champions like Kosante get toned down, Jax just continues to do better and better. If we look at Yone, once again, we have the same issue. His pick rate and his win rate, his pick rate has just continuously gone up over time. His ban rate has just continuously gone up over time, from 12% ban rate to now 26% ban rate. And I can't help but feel that, you know, if something was broken 3 months ago, that it's still broken now. But now they're saying, oh, but now the item changes are coming out, which, okay, great, but maybe we could have not spent the last half a year with these broken champions. Just a thought. Y is coming out. Congrats to Zeri and the whole Y pod. They did a fantastic job at executing on a fluid spellcasting caster, and we hope players are going to love it. You know, I hope players love it too. Honestly, I do. I hope Y is really fun to play, isn't overtuned, and doesn't dominate the meta. Now, after I say that, let's go through here, and I'm just going to say why maybe I get, you know, a bit annoyed at new league champions. If we just look at league champions, which one of these champions has not spent, okay, let's get back. Which is the first one of these champions in this list that did not immediately destroy the meta with either low counterplay or just blatantly overstat abilities? Which is the last of these champions that was actually like a release that didn't have to have multiple mechanics removed, or just completely stomped on the meta until they just severely undertuned them as a way to try to balance them? Okay, so you got Briar, Nefuri, Melio, Cosante, Nyla, Belveth, Renata Glask, Zeri, Vex, Akshan, Gwen, Viego, Rel, Seraphine, Samira, Yone, Lilia, I think Set. Now, Set was released extremely overpowered, but I think he's the only champion that hasn't just had mechanics blatantly ripped out of him, right? And then we get down to Aphelios, Senna, Qiyana, Yumi, Silas, Nico, Pike, Kaisa, Zoe, Ornn, Kane, Zaya, Rakan, Camille, Ivern, Kled. I think Kled is the last champion they released that actually didn't need half his mechanics completely yoinked out of the kit. So 2016, I would say that's a fair. 2016 is the last champion who hasn't had 10 billion mechanics ripped out of their kit. And if you say to me, well, what about X champion? I promise you, for every single champion above Kled, I promise you, I could make a video, I could go through it, and I could show you how many mechanics all these champions have had ripped out of their kit. So if you're going to put, and I think it's fair to talk about here because they put it in the patch note, and you might say I'm being pessimistic. I'm not being pessimistic. Okay, it's not pessimistic to say, hey man, like 30 out of your last 30 champions were just giga overtuned. for the last 7 years you've gone on this track, right? You haven't really released champions that feel nice to play against lately, right? Sed is like the last champion they felt that like feels nice to play against, and that's only because he's so undertuned right now that he's not just doing, you know, the run up EW half health combo, right? So I'm just trying to put that out there, okay? Because they put this in the patch notes, so I think it's fair to talk about. I think that it's a fair thing to say most champions do not, in fact, look forward to new champion releases, and instead, I would say that most players go, oh god, that's going to be so annoying to fight. I think Kosante was the last one that people were optimistic about, and then considering how much Kosante just absolutely destroyed everybody, that, you know, that hope kind of, yeah. Azir, on-hit changes were directionally on target. Nashor's is now a reasonable option without being a must-buy. However, he took too much of a power hit, looking to restore some of that without breaking the choice. Now, I have not actually looked at the stats here. I have not personally looked at them. I've been playing a lot of other games in the last week. So let me just familiarize myself. I'm just going to look this up really fast. They're saying Nashor's is no longer a must-buy. Okay, so last patch, we can see Nashor's Tooth was a 55% pick rate at high rank. This patch, we can see it's a 52% pick rate at high rank. 2 patches ago, it was a 61% pick rate, 57% pick rate, 57% pick rate. So I would say 52% is actually less picked than before, but actually not, because now that I'm looking at the full numbers, now it's being picked as a first option 25% of the time. So actually, if we compare that to last patch is being picked first 5% of the time. Now it's being picked 25% of the time. So actually, its pick percent hasn't gone down, it's actually gone up. It's just at second item. So if we actually look at build paths, if we look at a build path that does not involve Nashor's Tooth, let's just say there really aren't any. Now, if we compare this to last patch, we can see that there were picks without Nashor's Tooth at 8% pick rate and 5% pick rate. Now the lowest, or I should say the highest build without a Nashor's Tooth is 3%. So actually Nashor's Tooth is being built more than ever, which makes sense because you gave him an on-hit option. I'm not really sure what Riot is thinking about here, because they specifically made this change to make Nashor's Tooth more buildable on Azir. Like, they wanted Nashor's to feel better on him for it to proc the on-hit. And now I'm very confused because they're saying, look guys, we made Nashor's Tooth even more like required on Azir. It's now even more required, but look, now you don't need it. That doesn't make any sense to me. I did this whole thing because this doesn't make any sense to me. On-hit changes were directionally on target. Nashor's is now a reasonable option without being a must-buy. What are they talking about? Because they made it a must-buy. It was a mostly buy, now it's a must-buy. So I don't understand what the hell they're even going into right now. What do you mean? You're wrong. You're incorrect, sirs. You are not correct. I don't know what to say to you. Braum has been weak for a while, outside of a few specialized pro picks from some known Braum enthusiasts. We think he's a great champ to be relatively popular as he increases fun for everyone and lowers damage on both teams. We're looking at some of the changes we made over the years that made him a bit less fun. So what are they doing to Brahmy Boy? Braum is getting, Azir is getting more damage on his rank 5W, which I don't think, okay, I mean, cool, I guess. Now what's Braum doing? Braum's mana regen is going up, and the secondary knockup duration on his R is going from 0.3 to 0.6. Now that's good, because I think something that not a lot of people realized, 0.3 sounds like, oh, it's a 0.3 second knockup. That is slightly longer duration than a single Aatrox Q crit. So Braum would ult, hit his primary target for very little, then hit his secondary targets for 0.3. So like a little boop. This meant that Braum's ultimate was so goddamn undertuned that a lot of times when you would try to peel with it, you might not even notice that you cast it. In fact, I'm just curious here, and there is something I'm going to check here because I'm just very, very curious. The cast time on Braum's ultimate is actually 0.5. So the secondary targets would be stunned for less time than it would take Braum to cast the ability. Now, yes, he would stun multiple targets, but I just think it's really funny to me that literally casting the ability, the cast time was longer than the secondary knockup duration. So it is good that they're going back and adjusting that. That's one of the things that, what did he say here specifically? We're looking at some of the changes we've made over the years that have made it less fun. That's exactly the way I would put it. It made it no fun to play Braum, and you'd go, and then enemies would be like, dink. You know, this knockup that used to be like a tidal wave, it'd be like, go, 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 and everybody would be like, we're stunned now. And now it's like they walk forward, dink, and then they just continue to walk forward. And you'd literally lose, like, you'd lose time. Our changes to Galio haven't been super effective. We're taking more of a swing to adjust some of his core pattern things to make him more fun and less one rotation-y. Well, this is something that I've been complaining about for a very, 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 very long time. In fact, those of you who've been watching my videos have probably thought to yourself, wow, Hashinshin, are you still harping on about this? Yes, because, wow, I am. Galio's cooldown, his cooldowns are way too long. They're way too long. His Q cooldown is 12 to 10. Now they're pushing it down to 12 to 8. To keep it into perspective for people who, I know those of you who watch me a lot have seen this a lot, so you're probably groaning and you're going, oh god, he's bringing out the Galio thing again. But if we look at the Galio thing, let's look at it again. His passive cooldown is 5. A lot of on-hit abilities are 3 to 4. His is 5. His Q cooldown is 12 to 10. 10 seconds cooldown at max rank. To keep this into perspective to some of you guys, most champions on their main nukes are either 4 seconds cooldown or maybe 6 seconds cooldown, right? His is 10. His W, his shielded Durant, is 18 to 14, and that's after it got buffed, okay? His Justice Punch is 11 to 7, and his ultimate is 180 to 140. Now, these are after these cooldowns have been buffed over and over again, okay? So let me just be blunt here. Let me just remind you that I've been harping on about this for a very long time, and, I've been right. They continuously lower his cooldowns, and they're still so long. I think one thing Riot could take a serious look into is nerfing his overall damage and reducing his cooldowns. If I'm ever playing a bruiser against Galio, I know that I basically automatically win, because if I just build tanky enough to not be one-shot, basically on any bruiser, I will out-heal him, because he just doesn't have, like, a second thing, right? Like if I'm fighting even, like, burst mages like Annie, she can get back to a second Q in 4 seconds, right? Even if I'm fighting Syndra, she can get back to her 3rd or 4th Q, right? But, like, Galio can't. His lowest cooldown is a 7 seconds on Justice Punch. His main nuke is a 10-second cooldown. So yes, I do think pushing us down to 8 seconds, it's good. It's not quite there yet, but we've reduced the cooldown on his ultimate, we've reduced the cooldown on his W, now we're reducing the cooldown on his Q, so we're getting there, right? We're getting there. Gragas, he's weak after the nerfs he received a while ago. We're walking some of those back in a way that hopefully makes him feel better to play. So Gragas's passive cooldown's going from 12 to 12 to 6, which I think is a good thing. I like healing. I think healing is a good way to play the game, and I think it's very fun. Obviously, Gragas's healing was extremely overbearing in the laning phase. His ability to indefinitely poke you while also permanently healing just sort of dominated the game. Now, the problem is that Gragas exists outside of the laning phase. As a top laner, I can say Gragas is very unfun and I do not like him. He's very stupid. But then, like, as a League of Legends player, I can still, say to myself, boy, it does suck that Gragas has a passive that just basically stops existing after the laning phase. Because you also need to remember, the heal used to be 8%, now it's 6.5%. So this is not a heal that is a very big deal, right? Like, there's not a heal that is going to massively impact things. It's 6.5% cooldown, right? So what this does do is at a 6-second cooldown, it lets him play at the edges of fights and maybe get 2-3 heal ticks in. With 2 ticks, he'd get 13% of his health back. with 3 ticks, you know, he'd get nearly 20% of his health back. So like if he sits at the edge of a fight, especially after he takes damage, he can maybe get enough health to like eventually get back into that fight, which is good, right? Like if you have a passive, the passive should feel good to use, right? It shouldn't just be a passive that just beats people up in the laning phase then stops existing. Okay, Kosante's mana costs are shockingly way too goddamn high, and because of that, he generally just isn't very playable right now. So what they're doing is they're making the mana costs, instead of 60 to 80, they're going 40 to 60. Instead of a 30% damage ratio on his resistances, it will have a 50% damage ratio on his resistances. This will make Kosante's all-in a little bit better. It will also make him be able to actually use his W a little bit more. Is this what he needs? Well, I highly suspect we're back on the path to like Kosante being only a high-ranking pick. He's 47% win rate at Masters Plus, while at the low ranks, he's 45%. So if they continue to do all this jank, stupid crap, he might eventually be a more balanced pick. But boy, we have spent a lot of time on Kosante for a champion who wasn't really that broken. Like at Worlds, he's only the 3rd highest pick ban top laner. But you don't see Riot doing another Rumble rework to stop Rumble from being pick banned, do you? No, odd, that one. At either rate, yeah, this should help Kosante out to be a bit more better. Changes last patch were directionally solid, but they were a bit too much of a nerf, really. Making him unable to use his Q in any reasonable rate was too much of a nerf. I'm shocked. Now that we've learned more about what each of the levers do, we're trying to inject power back in a way that adds power for regular play without too much in elite. Obviously, at elite play, they poke with Q more often and they use their W less. So I guess what they're trying to do is make like his all-in better and his poke worse. I guess that's their attempt. It's not the worst idea I've ever heard in my life. Like it's probably a good idea overall. So no complaints on I guess what they're doing. I guess my only complaint is, wow, we are spending so much time on one champion, which, yeah. Leona has been weak for a long time. Yeah, for a very long time, actually. It's like Riot sometimes does revenge-based balancing. Leona was good for a long time, so now they're okay with leaving her bad for a long time. You know, like, oh man, this champion was good. Let's make them bad. Okay, cool, I guess. Part of this is due to being superseded in purpose by champions like Alistar, Nautilus, and Rakan to an extent. No, Rakan 100%. There's literally no point to playing an engaged support right now that isn't Rakan. I do not know why we're not nerfing Rakan. Rakan has been blatantly the best support for a blatantly long period of time. Remember that we shit on Jarvan because Jarvan had high stats, but then when we look at Rakan, we have high win rate, the highest pick rate by a good amount, and a good ban rate. This champion is completely dominant. Now, before you say, well, is a 10% ban rate really that high? It's like the same ban rate as a champion. Like let's look at this. He's got a higher pick rate than Aatrox, a higher ban rate, not by much, and then a significantly higher win rate. Aatrox's win rate is 49%. His win rate is 51%. So, you know, we could take a good chunk of power away from Rakan and he would still be on Aatrox tier, right? So, like, he'd still be a very high pick champion with a little bit less power. Okay. So what are they doing for Leona at any rate? Her W resistances are 20 to 40. They're going to shift that to 20 to 50. Then her R damage is going up by 50. So a little bit better team fighting and then a little bit tankier. I think resistances are probably the weakest thing about her, to be blunt. Resistances tend to just get penetrated by mid to late game. That's why champions like Nautilus, actually, in my opinion, tend to do a bit better because he can do things like he can just spam his W shield. And it's not like, you have to remember, it's not like tank supports will ever be tanky, right? Like, so one of the things Leona did is by getting that flat damage reduction, it allowed her to ignore. Because you have to remember, there's so many different like damages in the game right now. Like, there's so many different ways that you like do damage to people. Like, you hit someone with an ability which procs an ability, then hit them with an auto attack, then hit them with an ability which procs a passive which procs an ability, you know, blah blah blah. It's pretty common these days that Leona's W, like the flat damage reduction, will actually block like a lot of damage, right? So yeah. Anyway, the resistances, it's like fine, because like, it's fine. More damage is fine. I mean, I just think she's a little bit too weak right now. Like, if we look into it, Leona has fallen off so hard. Like, she's not even in the top 20 picks anymore. Down at a 48% win rate at Masters Plus. Like she doesn't even exist anymore. So will this be enough for her? Probably not. That's why I'm kind of making fun of this change, because it's like a change that's being changed just to change things. It's like a buff that is obviously not going to make them viable, but hey, we tried. Lucian is getting his E cooldown reduced from 22 to 14 to 19 to 14. This will definitely help him early game get more ease in and poke a bit better. I don't think Lucian's doing really that good in bot lane. His pick rate's not too high, but you need to remember, here's the thing, like, you can't have every 80 carry be in a top 10 pick, right? Like, you can't do that, right? Like obviously some of them can't be the top 10 most picked champion, because that's not how math works, okay? So after being bound less hard to Nami earlier in the year, we have an opportunity to buff him, trying to find a clearer identity for him, especially with Gale Force getting removed. He used to be the early bully, but now a lot of champs fill that niche. Well, I think part of the problem is that champions fill that niche like Vayne, who really shouldn't be filling the early bully niche, because, you know, to be blunt, that kind of means that Vayne outscales Lucian while also doing just as good early game as Lucian. So what's going on here? Mordekaiser, some quality of life changes and also some adjustments to incentivize him to build AP items more and tank items less. So I don't think that, like, it's a good idea for I think it's a good idea for Mord to be building too many AP items. First off, the way AP itemization works, if you give him too good of AP ratios, he's just going to be played as a funny one-shot champion, right? Like, if Mordekaiser has good AP ratios, people are just going to go Void Staff, Death Cap, Hourglass on him, and they're going to pick whatever mage item you rush, and then they're just going to go for the funny one-shot build. That's just how mages work. Death Cap is giga overpowered, Void Staff is giga overpowered, Hourglass is giga overpowered. And if he's incentivized too hard to build into AP itemization, what do you think he's going to do? That's right, Void Staff, Death Cap, and Hourglass. So I think Riot should be a little bit careful with that one. And definitely, I don't think Juggernauts should be building too much damage anyways, because, you know, that's kind of literally their thing, is to be tanky damage dealers, right? They're tanky, less mobile damage dealers. So, yeah. What are they doing for him? His Q AP ratios go from 60% to 70%, which is a pretty large buff, especially once you consider what the AP ratio of his isolated Q is. His isolated Q right now is already high. They don't say it in the wiki. I think someone deleted it for some reason, but it gets a 60% increase to that, right? Okay, so a 60% increase would be 42% AP ratio, so he would go to a 112% AP ratio on isolated Qs, which, as you might imagine, could very well start a world where Mordekaiser starts building AP, because if he hits a Q at 112% AP ratio, that's a lot of damage. Okay. His R now reveals his target on the start of cast. Brush doesn't cancel the ability. So what they're doing is they're doing a change here, where if you cast Mord's ultimate and your opponent runs into the brush, it won't cancel the ability anymore. So hopefully this stops a lot of the frustrations with playing Mord, where you go to ult someone right as they walk into a brush and you go, and then you try to use it again, and they walk into another brush, then you try to use it again, and that one finally goes off, but now, like, all your opponent's cooldowns are back, and you've wasted like 4 seconds running up just going, and then, okay, great, you finally got it. Good job, buddy. Okay, let's talk about Qiyana. Oh no, let's talk about Pantheon. He could use a little more power. He's not particularly strong in any role right now. Well, it appears they pulled the Pantheon buffs, which is definitely a good idea. I'm not really sure why they would buff Pantheon. Pantheon is cheesy as hell and just relies on funny one-shot builds, which are funny, but they're not all that interesting to play against and really not that interesting to deal with. And if Pantheon if he starts being a top 10 pick, I promise you it really will not be that fun, especially with how much they've, like, they weirdly nerfed his E cooldown and stuff, so like he can't even do long fights anymore, and now he's just a giga early game cheeser, which I don't think was a good idea. And you guys who've been watching me for a while, I always say this, you would know I said that wasn't a good idea. It's not fun to fight Giga early game cheesers. It's not, that's not interesting or anything, okay? Some adjustments to Qiyana to make her more forgiving to play. She's fine in the hands of the best players, but still struggles for regular players. We're not going to be able to claw back all of this, and there's no intention to make her super easy to play, but we want to lessen the burden of playing her slightly. Okay. So Qiyana is getting, ooh, that's a good chunk. She's getting 55 more mana at level 1, and then 10 more per level. So does Raya realize that Qiyana's like most built item is mana immune? Am I right about that? Is her most built item mana immune? Like overall, you know, if I search mana immune, do I just find Qiyana under it? Mana immune. Okay, so I guess it's actually Axiom Arc right now is her most built item. So I guess building Axiom Arc is kind of shirt out mana immune, but mana immune's already built a lot on her, and this mana buff just makes mana immune better on her. I would be okay with a mana buff. Like, it doesn't really matter to buff her mana. Good Qiyanas aren't gonna miss enough abilities that they'll run out of mana, right? But my only concern here is that this is just directly making mana immune stronger on her. Not by that much, but like 6-7 more damage on mana immune in addition to like the on hit damage is just kind of weird to me. But overall, I mean, Qiyana's like one of the better champions in the game. She's just not that popular, right? And so I'm not really sure this is a good idea to buff her just because she's bad at low ranks of gameplay. This just feels like one of those buffs I was talking about back in the day where it's like a rioter came out and was like, man, why is everyone not playing Qiyana? And they were like, screw it, let's buff her. Especially with all these giga overtuned AD assassin items coming out, maybe now isn't the time to be buffing Qiyana. I don't know, just a thought. They're like, we're gonna buff champions who won't be affected too much by the itemization changes. Also, we're buffing one of the champions most effective by the itemization changes. Okay. Vel'Koz. Some quality life changes for Vel'Koz, not intended to be a lot of power, but making him feel better to play. Okay, so we look at this. Let's look at Mr. Vel'Koz. Bug fixes for W and E fizzling at times. E timing buffs will come in a future patch due to a bug. I don't really have a lot to say about this. I don't really know what I would say about this, to be blunt. I have nothing to say about Vel'Koz. Zeri has been weak for a while. Cap? No, she hasn't. What are you talking about? Zeri's totally fine. Zeri's absolutely fine. She's just a weirdly high skill champion. She's just a weirdly high skill champion who your average player does not want to play because she's just too complicated. I mean, I think the best way to put it is she's the carpal tunnel champion. How many games can you play as Zeri before you're just sitting there and you're like, ooh, I think I'll play a different champion now. Ooh, right? Like you're just sitting there like, man, my wrist. Ooh, right? Like you don't want to do that. So obviously she's just not going to be a champion who everyone can play, and it's not going to be a champion who everyone can play well all the time. That's fine. A champion who, like Zeri, is still fine shouldn't be like you shouldn't be able to play well on Zeri every game, because that's just not how the champion is, right? She's just way too complicated. And unlike, let's say, other champions like Riven or Qiyana who have combos to do, the thing about Zeri is you have to it's just very easy in a way. It's very easy to screw up on Zeri because you just have to do so much on her, right? Like doing this is just so hard. And so inevitably you're going to miss. Inevitably you're not going to play perfectly. I think that's just true, right? But you've even seen it at Worlds. The Worlds players screw up on her constantly, actually. Now, is that the fault of Zeri? Yes, actually. I don't think the developer Zeri quite thought through what we would need to do to play Zeri optimally. It's one of those things like Urgot that kind of isn't actually that fun to do and quickly stops being interesting. At least Zeri's like cute waifu girl, so people try to do it anyway. Urgot is nothing for that level of needless complexity. But I guess what I'm trying to say here is I don't think Zeri's weak. I think she's just like, she's in this weird position where it's like no one really wants to play her and no one can really consistently play her. We've seen at Worlds though that she does just fine. when you play her well, and even at Worlds, so people can screw up. What's the solution to this? Personally, let's just leave her down in the dump forever, right? Like, screw it. Why not? I know Zeri players don't like to hear this, but like, she's just a champion who really was not properly designed. It's too much to play that champion in League of Legends. I know you can say, but in RTS games don't literally have you doing this. And the thing is, it's literally like your APM on Zeri, and I'm going to use it, your APM on Zeri just has to be way too high, right? Like, it's just too much. It's just too much to do on this champion. And it's very, very, very easy to screw up. Nerfs targeted at adjusting the balance of her lethality and bruiser builds. We're keeping the nerfs on pace with players continuing to learn her and climb the mastery curve. As mentioned before, she is one of the steepest learning curve champions in the game. Well, let's actually look at the changes they're doing to Zeri. 80 growth from 1.3 to 2. W damage up 10. Yeah, these changes are going to be quite impactful, I can already tell. Are they going to push her to like 50% win rate? Probably not. But even at like 48, 49% win rate, Zeri already starts to be pick ban and pro play and auto pick at the high ranks. So is she going to get there with these changes? My gut instinct is she'll be good. Definitely good. Pick ban. You have to remember, if Zeri goes pick ban, that means that she's so overpowered that people are willing to put up with the champion just because she's that overtuned, right? So, yeah. As for who are we talking about? Briar. Well, once again, Briar is another new champion who is improperly designed. A champion with a literal int button is not good for the game. Shocking. I know, it's crazy to me. Okay, so what do we have here? Her attack speed ratio is from 0.644 to 0.669. So attack speed gives her slightly more attack speed now. Not going to go into it more than that. Her armor is going down by 2. Her Q damage is going down by 20 at rank 5. Her W attack speed is going down by 5%. Her E damage reduction is going from 40% to 35%. And her R damage is going down from 70% AD ratio to 50% AD ratio. But it's being changed to magic damage. So I would say overall that's maybe actually a buff to Briar. Maybe not for the lethality builds. Well, it's probably a buff to old Briar. Because even lethality Briar like probably prefers having some magic damage, right? So all I can say is, wow, what a poorly made champion who, wow, clearly a champion with a literal int button. Like, it sounds funny in theory. It's one of those things where it's like, in theory, it's funny to have a champion with an int button, but then in reality, you need to actually balance the game. And then I'm going to balance it. That's how I feel like a lot of champions are. That's how I feel like a lot of these new designs are. It's like, man, wouldn't this be funny? But then you put it in game and you're like, actually, that wasn't very funny. It's just annoying. You know, it's like let's take Yone, right? Wouldn't it be funny if there was a champion who could leap forward and snap out of any CC backwards while getting a movement speed buff, and then nothing personnel kid and do damage based on how much damage he did when he sheathes his weapon? And yeah, that's funny in theory. It's cool in theory, but then you actually put it in game, and I feel like a developer should have shut that shit down really early, right? Like, I'm always reminded of Aatrox. There's a video out there when they were reworking Aatrox that his ultimate was going to make him and an ally slowly kill themselves in return for huge buffs. They would do massively more damage, but they would slowly die, right? And the idea was that they would have to get as many kills as they could before they died. Cool, in theory, right? In theory. Then they found out that while playing it, it often felt very frustrating both for his opponents and for Aatrox. If it was strong enough to where Aatrox could run people down, then it felt like there really wasn't any counterplay because he just started doing massive damage while taking some damage back. If he didn't get enough out of it, then his opponent would kite away and he would just die. And then his ally really got no ability to control it at all, right? So they just found it was very frustrating and they removed it from the game. Cool, in theory, until you actually play with it and you go, man, I just don't like this, right? Like, if you make it fun for one person, then it doesn't become fun for your opponent. Briar, the int button, just isn't really that fun for either party. Briar needs to be extremely overtuned so the int button doesn't just kill the champion off, but then it's not fun for her opponent if she's so overtuned that a champion can just gap close or stun to you, then go int button and just run forward and go nya 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 nya, and then you die. Right? It's just stupid waifu champion number 92 that they tried to make needlessly uncomplicated that then just became weirdly overcomplicated and stupid because you gave them a stupid button that ints themselves if they're dumb. Ivern, he's been strong for a while and become a bit stale, just tapping him down a bit. Yeah, I can't think of literally any jungler in the game right now who's been strong for a while and it's getting a bit stale. I can't think of any jungler who's been like that, who's been top tier for like 12 years now, who gets a bit stale seeing them always top tier at all points in time. I can't think of anyone like that. I can't think of anyone like that. I can't think of anybody like that. I can't think of one jungler like that. Not even one of them. So let's see what they're doing to Ivern. Ivern, base health down by 25 and E slow down by 5%. That's a big nerfy worfy. Now let's talk about the second tweet, the full preview tweet. Okay, we're going on, chat. We gotta keep going. Okay, we have to make it through the second tweet. Now we're gonna talk about these champions again, but with some different perspective on them. Partial revert of the W damage as the changes were directionally positive, just off in magnitude. Now I like when they talk about this rather than talking about this weird thing where like Nashor is now a reasonable option without being a must buy. It's like maybe they're admitting that that was a really stupid thing to say by not bringing it up again. Because I'm going to be blunt, that was a really stupid thing to say. Braum. A while ago, we nerfed Braum's knockup duration that reduced his pick rate in Pro and made him more playable in Normal by a significant amount. It was also a satisfaction hit, so we're returning some of it. I don't think Braum is playable in Normal, is he? He's pretty bad everywhere. And by a bit ago, don't they mean like 5 years ago? It's been a while. Where even is Braum? Oh my god, I thought I scrolled down too much. No. Braum is like down here with like Pantheon, Vel'Koz, and Nico's support. Like he's down here with the supports who aren't even meant to be supports, right? Like the dude is down. Okay, he's like, it's like we look at Braum and we see, yes, a champion who does almost as good as Maokai, a champion almost as good as Maokai's support. Cool. Okay. I'm going to close this one so I don't accidentally click on it again. Okay. I think what they're trying to say is that Braum is not satisfying and also he's really, really bad. Galio's cooldowns have been pretty long for a while. Wow, have they? Has anyone mentioned that? Do you think there's been any YouTuber, streamer, anyone who's mentioned that sort of thing? Anyone who's mentioned that Galio's cooldowns are just like really, 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 really long? Do you think anyone has possibly brought that up lately, ever? Just out of question. Anyone ever talk about that? Okay, no, just asking him on. And he's turned into more of a one rotation, then do nothing for a wild champion. Really? He's a one rotation, then do nothing for a wild champion? That's crazy. I wonder if anyone's ever mentioned that. I wonder if anyone's ever, brought that up, that's kind of really bad gameplay patterns and not really fun for anyone. Do you think anyone's mentioned that? Especially as a melee champion, that it might suck when a melee champion needs to one-shot you to be relevant, especially when they don't really have that much mobility to begin with. So a lot of their thing is like E into a W, and then if he can't escape it, he just goes, haha, one shot. Okay. This change hopefully gives him more flexibility and a more fun gameplay pattern. Yes, I would rather dodge Galio's Qs and like have actual things that I like interact with him on than like he tries to one-shot me and if it fails, I just beat him up for a bit. Gragas has been weak for a while and less fun to play after the passive change, bringing some of that back without making it as strong early game as it used to be. Yeah, I think that's a good change. That's a good change. So just reading through here, Braum, just to remind everybody, he's getting the secondary knockup and the minimum knockup duration on his R is becoming 0.6. So you can't literally stun yourself for longer than you stun an opponent, okay? Galio is getting his Q cooldown from 12 to 10 to 12 to 8, so he hopefully can do more than just try to one-shot people. Gragas' passive is going from 12 to 12 to 6, so yeah, he can have a more fulfilling an interesting passive. This tweet seems to be way more well made. The other tweet, I don't know what they were talking about. A lot of what they were talking about was just weird. And now they seem to actually have like, they seem to actually be like talking about things that exist in reality land and actually be giving like, because like it's most of these changes are good. But like their justification for them in the last tweet was just really weird and off and didn't really make any sense to me. Okay. Kusante is weak. We're looking for a bit more power in W, but not looking to go overboard. Long term, we like having more power in W. It is something that has more polarized interactions by matchup, and it's a very telegraphed portion of his kit. W is also a bit too expensive now that the paradigm and hitability has changed. Okay, so what they're saying in effect is they like his W because it's really bad in some matchups and really good in others, which boy oh boy, every time I hear that, what do I think? Riot pushing counterpick meta. Yay! Which we know they do. We know Riot as a company, really pushes counterpick meta really hard. Like that's something they do. And I don't know why they do it. Nobody likes that they do it. They just do it, right? So again, his W mana cost is going down by 20 flat at all ranks, and its ratio for resistances and to its damage is going from 30% to 50%. So it will do more damage and it will cost less mana, which should be overall a good thing. I just don't like that they're leaving it as an ability that's like really good in some matchups and just totally useless in other matchups, right? Like that's obviously not a good thing, and I don't know why they're like doubling down on that so hard. Leona was considered the poster child for supports one-shotting you pre-durability and received a lot of nerfs leading up to that point. Post-durability, she lost a lot of that soloing power and has dropped off a lot ever since, adding a bit of damage back in the early game, being careful not to go overboard. They're not really adding damage in the early game. It depends on what you mean early game, right? Like, the biggest buff is your W getting more resistances. Going from 20 to 40 to 20 to 50 means she has 10 more armor and magic resist at level 9, right? Adding 50 more damage at level 6, that doesn't affect level 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. It only adds 50 damage at level 6 once, right? So I don't think this is really that much like early game. This seems more of like, because you have to remember you're a support, right? Like you get level 6 when? Like level probably around minute 9 to 10, assuming games last like 30 minutes on average now. I think they said maybe 28 to 30. At either rate, we can say a third of the game goes by where she doesn't have her ultimate. I'm just keeping that in perspective. Lucian, looking at a fun change for Lucian that allows him to trade a bit more in the early game. He's dropped off a bit in terms of being an early focus champion and should help all the way up until putting multiple points in queue. So as a reminder, Lucian's E cooldown is going from 22 to 14 to 19 to 14. So this doesn't help his late game, but this does massively help his early game. And remember, because Lucian's passive reduces the cooldown on his passive flatline, his passive is not really a 22-second cooldown. Typically, like he E's forward, autos, Q's, autos, right? So like typically in that situation, he goes like -2, -2, -2, -2, right? So even in that situation where he only double procs his passive, it'll go from 22 but really 16 seconds cooldown to 19 but really 13 seconds cooldown. So this will definitely help Lucian trade more. I guess my only concern here is like, why are they like trying to hard force Lucian into being an early game champion? I guess his short range just doesn't really let him be a late game champion, but I'm not really sure it's healthy that like 80 carries are looked at in terms of being good early game, because if they're good early game, then they're good early, mid, and late game. Every 80 carry will be good late game because they're an 80 carry, because they have Lord Dominic's, right? There's no other class with an item that just says you will be relevant in late game no matter what, right? Like there's no other class like that. At best, you can say maybe mages with Void Staff, but Void Staff doesn't have quite the same amount. Like Lord Dominic's has crit and armor shred and bonus damage to anyone that builds health, right? So like it scales your damage 3 different ways. Void Staff just gives you magic pen, and I'm not saying Void Staff isn't powerful. I'm just saying this difference. Like if you get like Annie to late game, yeah, she does like a lot of damage, right? Like big whoop, right? often she can't chew through bruisers or tanks. If you get Lucian to late game, he goes Lord Dominic's. He'll still chew through a late game Scion, right? Like, yeah. Mordekaiser, I know we're buffing Q. At the same time, this is his worst ratio and one that we think needs to be corrected for him to build AP more regularly. R is a quality of life change that Mord main's been requesting for a while. I mean, I definitely think it's a good idea that Mord's ultimate can't be cancelled by walking into a brush, but I just don't know about buffing his QAP ratio because, again, this will push his QAP ratio on an isolated target to 112%. I can't think of any champion in the game with a 112% AP ratio on a 4-second cooldown ability. What is, I mean, I'm trying to think here, like, where else is there an ability with that high of damage on that low of a cooldown, right? I really can't think of any. At best, I can think of LeBlanc's Chains with a 115% AP ratio, but that's on an 11-second cooldown. Like, yeah, it's easier for LeBlanc to hit her Chains than it is for Mord to hit an isolated Q, but, you know, that's just because Mord is melee, right? But at the same time, I just think, you know, we're getting into that dangerous territory where, you know, are we going to be in the land of Mord presses R and then like has a death cap and just presses Q and you take 1500 damage and you die? You know, are we going to be into that territory? Is he going to build flat penetration and void staff and reduce all your magic resist while having 600 AP, blah 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 blah? Kitty is being a cat and she's just running around. Normally she likes to just cuddle in if I have my legs up like this. She'll probably do that right now. Okay. Then let's go look at Qiyana. As mentioned earlier, Qiyana's mana costs are excessively punishing, and she often opts into mana itemization at least some of the time. This change should result in her feeling less punishing to play and learn. I think Qiyana doesn't really opt into mana itemization, not really. I think she more opts into Mana Immune, because Mana Immune is still like the highest damage item in the entirety of League of Legends, right? So it's not like, I don't really look at Mana Immune as like a mana item. I look at like, it's just a giga damage item, right? It's just like death cap for 80 carries, right? So I don't think what they're saying here is entirely correct. Not needing mana, being able to build non-mana immune itemization is fine, but then you need to consider that her base mana will funnel into mana immune, which then makes it better on her. Okay. Talon, quality of life change to have range Q reset autos like melee Q. So now Talon, his range Q will reset his auto attack. Presumably, this means you can like auto attack a minion, then Q to an opposing champion, then auto attack them again instantly. That's probably good for like consistency because it's weird. Like, it's weird on abilities like that if it doesn't reset your auto attack because then you just sort of awkwardly stand next to them. There are some abilities like that still in the game where you like gap close in, then like you just awkwardly stand there for a second. Isn't that right, Kitty? Kitty says meow. She doesn't say meow. She looks at me like meow. Yeah, that's what she's doing. Okay. Zeri, now that Triforce Zeri is gone and Pro is done for the year, we feel more comfortable giving Zeri some of the AD growth back. We'll see how she performs with new items and then monitor. Okay, so my question or concern here is if we know that buffing Zeri at all might push her back into a pro play pick, then why are we bothering? They're literally saying, pro play is done for the year so we can buff Zeri, right? Like, most champions that are broken in pro play, most champions are also broken in solo queue, as is Zeri. So I know for like everyone else, maybe Zeri won't be broken, but as a champion, they act like she's only breaking the game in pro play. Like she never breaks the game at the high ranks, right? Which is just simply not true. Zeri constantly breaks the game at the high ranks, not just pro play, and so it can make her quite frustrating whenever she's good, because then she just dominates where I play. Now, our AD growth is going from 1.3 to 2, so that's obviously going to be better. Her W damage is going up by 10. I'm just concerned by this statement. And Pro is done for the year. Like, are you just going to nerf her back when Pro play starts up again? Like, do Zeri players only get to play Zeri in, like, late November to early February? Is that it? And then anytime other than that, like, 2.5 months, she has to be terrible? Wouldn't it be better to try to do something about her, maybe? I don't know. I don't know how you can, I guess, is one of the things. Like, how do you change Zeri to be a better champion for game health? Briar, as mentioned yesterday, trying to narrow the gap between her overperforming lethality builds and the worst performing bruiser builds. by converting some spells to magic damage. Even though she's received a lot of nerfs in a row, it's mainly to keep up with her extremely steep learning curve. See, they keep phrasing this like Briar is one of the most complicated champions in the game that you need to be a master of the arts to play. It's not really a learning curve. It's just that, look, most players are not good enough to understand an int button, right? If you put Zeri on like a master's player, they would kind of understand the concept behind an int button. Low-ranking players are just going to panic hit their int button, right? And they're going to die. And so they keep phrasing this like she has an extremely steep learning curve, like she's one of the most complicated champions in the game. I would say the problem is, as everyone has noticed, the problem is an int button makes her quite complicated because you can int yourself, and it's not like complicated as in mechanical. It's not like an extremely steep learning curve. It's just that you need to learn to stop doing the int button and inting your champion. Okay. Ivern. Some simple nerfs to keep Ivern focused mainly on the early game. What the hell are they talking about? So they're trying to keep Ivern focused on the early game by only nerfing his... Okay. Some simple nerfs to Ivern focus mainly on the early game. Okay, so they mean they're only nerfing his early game. Okay, that makes more sense to me. Okay. So I just read it stupidly. Okay, so Ivern, his base health is going down by 25, and his E slow is going down by 5%. Okay, so once you start reaching that 60 to 70 to 80% slow rate, the thing is, it stops kind of mattering, because most champions will actually hit the minimal movement speed. A 70% slow already drags most champions down to minimum movement speed, so it doesn't actually do that much. Going from 75% to 65% doesn't actually change the game unless you've built like movement items and stuff like that. So this slow change mostly hits the early game. Going from 50 to 45 will basically always affect the game. I can't really think of many or any champions that would not affect. Then 25 less health obviously gives him less health, which then makes him weaker. Then Vel'Koz. Some bug fixes in here. We found a nasty bug with the E timing changes at the last second, but we'll continue to have those later after the bugs are resolved. Not really sure what they're talking about, but Vel'Koz. Bug fixes for W and E fizzling at times. E timing buffs will come in a future patch due to a bug. So I guess what they're trying to say here is that his E has some bug, something, where it ends up being too buggy. I don't really know. They're being a bit like I don't know what they're saying, because like they're saying there's a bug. How do I know what the bug is? Do I know if the bug is bad? Do I know if they're doing like I don't know. They say there's a bug, so there's probably a bug. So then once again, that's the upcoming patch. That's what we got to work with. This is Kitty. She's a kitty cat. Kitty is a cat. She's fluffy and cute and adorable, and everybody loves Kitty. So, thank you all for watching. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for liking the video. Leave a comment on anything you read here. Leave a comment on anything. And as always, I hope all of you have a great rest of your day. Kitty is back being a kitty cat and walking in front of me. She is very frustrated that I hugged her and then stopped hugging her. And now she is on her way to be right in front of me because she does not think I'm noticing her enough. So thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.